My daughter-in-law stood in front of a judge and swore I didn't know my own name anymore. What she didn't know was the recorder in my shirt pocket had been running for 6 months. She thought she was locking me away. She was about to lock herself in instead. And the strangest part? My own son signed the papers. My name is Richard Coleman. I spent 38 years practicing law before I hung up my briefcase for good. Contracts, estates, the occasional courtroom fight. I'd seen every kind of trick a person could pull to get what didn't belong to them. I thought that made me careful. I thought it made me safe. I was wrong about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My wife, Diane, passed away 11 months ago. Heart failure, sudden. The kind of thing you don't get to prepare for, no matter how much you tell yourself you will. We'd been married 41 years. The house we shared felt too big and too quiet the moment she was gone. I'd walk past her reading chair by the window and half expect to see her there, with her glasses pushed down her nose, correcting me about something I'd said wrong at dinner. My son Tyler called me 2 weeks after the funeral. "Dad, come stay with us. Just for a while, you shouldn't be alone in that house." I said yes before he finished the sentence. Tyler's my only child, and even though he's 42 now with a career of his own, some part of me still sees the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest watching baseball games. I trusted him completely. I still do, in the ways that matter. But trust in a person and trust in the people around that person are two very different things. Tyler's wife, Melissa, welcomed me with open arms, or so it looked. She helped me settle into the guest room. She asked about Diane with what seemed like real tenderness. She cooked meals she said were Dad's favorites, even though I don't remember ever telling her what those were. She'd smile at me across the table and say things like, "We're just so glad you're here, Richard. Family should take care of family." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Melissa had been part of our family for 12 years. She'd given me 2 grandchildren I adored, Sophie and Ben, ages 9 and 7, who'd climb into my lap and ask me to tell them lawyer stories like they were bedtime adventures. I'd sit on their bedroom floor some nights and think, this is what Diane would have wanted. This is what a family looks like when it holds together after loss. The house itself was comfortable. Tyler had done well for himself in commercial real estate, and Melissa didn't work outside the home. She called herself the CFO of the household, always with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed that laugh early on but told myself it meant nothing. People have their quirks. I had plenty of my own. For the first few weeks, life had a gentle rhythm. Mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Afternoons helping Sophie with her math homework, since apparently long division still trips up 9-year-olds the same way it did when Tyler was that age. Evenings where Tyler and I would sit on the back porch and talk about nothing in particular. Sports, weather, memories of Diane that made us both go quiet for a moment before one of us cracked a joke to break the silence. I started to think that maybe this was how the next chapter of my life would go. Not the chapter I'd planned. Not the one where Diane and I traveled to see the Grand Canyon, like we always said we would once retirement really settled in. But a chapter with purpose, with grandchildren, with a son who still needed his father around. Melissa made a point of managing my schedule. Doctor's appointments, medication reminders. I take something for blood pressure and a low dose for cholesterol. Nothing unusual for a man of 71. She offered to keep track of it all. "You've done enough taking care of people your whole life, Richard," she told me one evening, refilling my water glass without me asking. "Let someone take care of you for a change." It sounded kind. It sounded like exactly what a grieving widower needed to hear. I didn't think much of it when she started asking questions that seemed a little too specific. Where did I keep Diane's old jewelry? Had I updated my will since she passed? Did I still have the safe deposit box downtown? Or had I moved everything into the house? I answered honestly, the way you do when you don't yet have a reason not to. It was a Tuesday evening, about 6 weeks into my stay, when I noticed the first thing that didn't sit right. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water past midnight, and I heard Melissa's voice from the kitchen, low and careful, the particular tone people use when they don't want to be overheard. "He's getting worse, I'm telling you." He asked me the same question 3 times today. I stood in the hallway, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, and felt something shift in my chest. I had asked her one question that day, about whether the mail had come, once, not 3 times. She wasn't talking to Tyler, he was upstairs asleep. She was on the phone with someone else entirely, and whoever it was, she was building a story about me. A story I hadn't lived. I told myself I'd misheard her. Grief plays tricks on a person's mind, and maybe it was playing tricks on mine too, making me suspicious of kindness I didn't deserve to question. I went back to bed and didn't mention it to anyone. But sleep didn't come easy that night, and it came even harder in the nights that followed. Small things started catching my attention after that. The way a splinter catches your finger before you even feel the sting. Melissa began reminding me of things I hadn't forgotten. "Richard, don't forget you have your doctor's appointment Thursday," she'd say, even though I'd written it on my own calendar and mentioned it myself the day before. When I'd correct her, gently, the way you do, she'd give Tyler a look. Not a big look, a small one. The kind meant to be caught by exactly one person in the room, and it wasn't me. I started noticing she asked me to repeat myself more than she used to, even when I hadn't mumbled or spoken too quietly. "Sorry, Richard. What was that? Can you say that again?" Then she'd glance toward Tyler, or toward her phone, like she was checking that something had registered. I began to feel like I was being tested without knowing what the test was for. One afternoon, I misplaced my reading glasses. I'd set them down on the kitchen counter while I helped Ben with a puzzle, and 20 minutes later they were gone. I searched the counter, the table, my jacket pockets. Melissa found them for me, in the refrigerator, tucked behind the orange juice. "Oh, Richard," she said, soft and sad, like she was breaking bad news to a child. "You've got to be more careful." I hadn't put them there. I would have remembered doing something that strange. But I laughed it off in the moment, because what else do you do? You don't accuse your son's wife of planting your own glasses in the refrigerator. You sound unhinged saying a sentence like that out loud. Except the sentence kept repeating in my head anyway. A week later, I went looking for my checkbook to write a birthday check for Sophie, and it wasn't in the drawer where I always kept it. When I asked Melissa if she'd seen it, she frowned with real concern. "You gave it to me last week, remember? You said you didn't want to worry about losing it." I did not remember that conversation. Not one piece of it. I'm a man who spent decades cross-examining witnesses and catching inconsistencies in sworn testimony. My memory for detail had always been one of my sharpest tools. And I was certain, the way you're certain of your own name, that I had never handed my checkbook to Melissa. I didn't push it that day. I told myself, once again, that maybe I was more tired than I realized. That grief and a new house and a new routine could scramble anyone's memory a little. But that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the guest room closet, pulled out an old digital voice recorder I'd bought back when I still did depositions myself, checked that the battery still worked, and I clipped it inside my shirt pocket the next morning. I told myself it was nothing, just a precaution. Lawyers keep records, old habits. 3 days later, I was walking past Tyler's home office when I heard my name again, this time in Tyler's voice, tight and strained. "Are you sure, Mel?" He seemed fine at dinner. And Melissa's voice, patient, almost gentle. "That's the thing about it, honey. It comes and goes. One minute he's sharp as ever, and the next he's hiding checkbooks and putting his glasses in the fridge." My aunt went through the exact same thing before we finally got her help. I really think we need to talk to someone. For his own safety. I stood frozen in that hallway with my hand against the wall, and for the first time since Diane died, I felt something colder than grief settle into my chest. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity. Someone was building a case against me, and I was the only one in the house who didn't yet know the verdict she was aiming for. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. 38 years in the law taught me that the moment you tip your hand, the other side gets to rewrite the story before you've finished gathering the evidence. So I did what I'd always done best. I built a case. I kept the recorder running every day, tucked in my shirt pocket, close enough to catch conversations in the kitchen, the hallway, the back porch. I started writing down dates and times in a small notebook I kept in my nightstand, the checkbook, the glasses in the refrigerator. Every conversation where Melissa reminded me of something that had never happened. I dated each entry the way I used to date case files. If this was going to be a fight, I intended to win it the same way I'd won every fight that mattered in my career, with facts, not feelings. It didn't take long for the picture to sharpen. I found the checkbook myself, 11 days after Melissa claimed I'd given it to her for safekeeping. It was in the bottom drawer of the desk in Tyler and Melissa's home office, tucked beneath a stack of folders. Next to it sat something that stopped my heart cold, a folder labeled, in Melissa's handwriting, Dad, Capacity. I shouldn't have opened it. Maybe a more careful man wouldn't have. But I was Richard Coleman, retired attorney, and if there was ever a piece of discovery sitting in front of me, I wasn't about to leave it unread. Inside were printed emails between Melissa and a lawyer named Gordon Pierce, a name I didn't recognize, someone who specialized, according to his letterhead, in guardianship and conservatorship proceedings. The emails went back nearly 4 months, longer than I'd even lived in this house. One email from Melissa read, "He's still functioning well enough day to day that people who see him occasionally won't notice anything. That's actually the problem. We need enough documented incidents before we file, or a judge won't take it seriously." Another, dated just 2 weeks earlier, "Tyler's coming around. He loves his father and doesn't want to believe it, but I've been showing him the pattern. I think by next month he'll agree to sign. Sign for what? I didn't yet know for certain, but I could guess, and my guess turned out to be exactly right. Buried further in the folder was a draft petition for guardianship, full guardianship, not a limited one, citing early-stage cognitive decline, and requesting that all of my financial accounts, including the trust Diane and I had built over 4 decades, be placed under a court-appointed guardian's control. The name proposed for that guardian, naturally, was Melissa Coleman. I sat at that desk for a long time after I read it, long enough that Ben came looking for me to ask if I'd play checkers, and I had to tell my 7-year-old grandson, gently, that Grandpa needed a few minutes alone. The betrayal wasn't romantic. It wasn't the kind of thing this channel usually tells stories about. But make no mistake, it was every bit as calculated, every bit as cold, as any affair I'd ever heard confessed in a courtroom. Someone I had trusted, someone who fed me dinner and tucked reading glasses into a refrigerator with her own 2 hands, had spent 4 months constructing a false narrative about my mind so she could take control of everything Diane and I had spent a lifetime building. And my son, my Tyler, was being walked toward the edge of signing away his own father's independence, one small manufactured incident at a time. I closed the folder. I put the checkbook in my own pocket, and I made a decision that felt harder than almost anything I'd done since burying my wife. I wasn't going to react, not yet, not with anger, not with accusations, not with a single word that would let Melissa know I'd found her out. If she wanted a case built on documented incidents, then I would give her a case built on documented incidents of my own. Except mine would be true, and mine would be aimed squarely back at her. For the next several weeks, I played the role Melissa had already written for me. I let her remind me of appointments I hadn't forgotten. I let her find things I hadn't lost, plant things I hadn't misplaced. Each time, I said nothing but "Thank you, dear," in the mildest voice I could manage, while the recorder in my pocket caught every word. At night, once the house was quiet, I built my actual case. I called an old colleague from my practicing days, a man named Arthur Bell who'd spent his career on elder law and estate litigation. I didn't tell him everything over the phone. Old habits again, never say more than you have to on a line you can't fully trust. But I asked him to meet me for lunch downtown, away from the house, away from anyone who might report back what I was doing with my afternoons. Arthur listened to the recordings I'd gathered. He read the printed emails I'd photographed with my phone before returning the folder to its drawer, careful to leave no trace that I'd been there. When I finished, he set down his coffee and looked at me the way you look at a friend who's just told you something you wish weren't true. "Richard," he said, "this isn't just unethical. Depending on how far she's taken it, some of this could be criminal. Forgery, if she's fabricated any signed documents. Fraud, if she's misrepresented your condition to a court or a medical professional to build her petition." He was right about the forgery. I found that out 2 weeks later, when I finally located the medical evaluation Melissa's petition referenced. A letter supposedly from my own physician, Dr. Alvarez, noting concerning signs of cognitive decline observed during a recent visit. I had not seen Dr. Alvarez in recent months. I called his office myself, using my own phone, in my own voice, and asked to confirm my last appointment date. It had been 8 months earlier, for a routine blood pressure check, and I had passed every cognitive marker with flying colors, as I had every year since I turned 65. The letter in Melissa's folder was a fabrication, my physician's signature, forged. Arthur helped me build a proper legal response, not a reaction, a response, the difference being everything. We compiled the recordings, organized by date. We obtained a certified statement from Dr. Alvarez confirming he'd written no such letter and had documented no such decline. We pulled bank records showing every transaction I'd made myself, competently, over the exact period Melissa claimed I'd been slipping. And we prepared quietly to have Melissa's guardianship petition, the one she'd finally convinced Tyler to sign just 10 days earlier, thrown out not on sympathy but on hard, undeniable fact, in front of the very judge she'd hoped would rubber stamp her plan. I still hadn't said a word to Tyler about any of it. That was the hardest part. I watched my son grow more distant with me by the day, more careful in his tone, more prone to those sideways glances I now understood Melissa had trained him to give. He believed his father was disappearing in front of him. He believed he was doing the responsible thing, the loving thing, by signing papers to protect me from myself. He had no idea he was about to protect me from someone else entirely. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Melissa had no reason to suspect anything was different from how she'd planned it. She dressed carefully that morning, composed and sorrowful, the picture of a devoted daughter-in-law forced into an unbearable decision. She squeezed my hand in the car on the way to the courthouse and said, "This is for your own good, Richard. I hope you'll understand that someday." I squeezed her hand back and said nothing at all. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I used to argue in, but it felt enormous that morning. Every sound sharpened, every second stretched thin. Melissa's attorney, Gordon Pierce, stood and presented the petition with practiced compassion, describing a loving family reluctantly forced to seek guardianship for a father showing clear, documented signs of cognitive decline. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, asked if the respondent, meaning me, had counsel present. Arthur Bell stood. I watched Melissa's face change before he'd said a single word. She hadn't known I'd brought my own attorney. She hadn't known there was anything left to prepare for. Arthur was measured and precise, the way the best of us always are in a room like that. He introduced the certified statement from Dr. Alvarez, confirming no such evaluation had ever taken place, and no letter bearing his signature had ever been written. He introduced the bank records showing months of sound, independent financial decisions made entirely by me. And then he played the recordings. The judge listened without expression as Melissa's own voice filled the room. "That's the thing about it, honey. It comes and goes. We need enough documented incidents before we file. I think by next month he'll agree to sign." Each recording landed like a verdict being read aloud, one clause at a time. Tyler sat beside Melissa, and I watched the color drain out of his face piece by piece. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at his wife. Gordon Pierce tried to object, tried to argue chain of custody, tried anything a good attorney tries when the ground gives out beneath him. But the forged medical letter was the piece that finished it. A forensic document examiner Arthur had retained confirmed the signature didn't match a single verified sample of Dr. Alvarez's handwriting on file. Forgery of a medical record, submitted in a court filing, was not something any judge in that state was inclined to overlook. The judge dismissed the guardianship petition in full. She referred the matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential elder abuse and forgery charges. Melissa was escorted from the courthouse that same afternoon, not in handcuffs, but under an investigation that would follow her for a long time to come. Tyler didn't say a word to her as she left. He turned to me instead, in the hallway outside the courtroom, and the man who'd spent months looking at me sideways finally looked at me straight on, his eyes wet, his voice barely holding together. "Dad, I almost signed away your life. I almost let her." He couldn't finish the sentence. I put my hand on his shoulder, the same way I had when he was 7 years old, and struck out at his first Little League game. "You believed someone you loved," I told him. "That's not a crime, son. It's just a lesson that costs more than it should." The weeks that followed weren't simple. Tyler filed for divorce within the month, and the custody arrangements for Sophie and Ben were still being sorted out by the time I moved into a place of my own, a smaller house, closer to Arthur and the old friends I'd let drift during my grief. I saw my grandchildren every weekend without fail. I made sure of that myself. As for my will, I made one change that mattered more than any other. Melissa's name had never been on it, But I added a clause all the same, plain and permanent, making certain no one bearing her name could ever again lay claim to anything Diane and I had built. Tyler understood. He didn't ask me to reconsider. I started my new life the way I'd started my old one, decades ago, with a clear head, a full ledger, and no patience left for anyone who mistook my kindness for weakness. Sometimes the most satisfying ending isn't watching someone get destroyed. It's watching them finally receive the bill for everything they broke and realizing there's no one left willing to pay it for them. That's all for today on Dad Until Dawn. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have walked away this calmly?